Welcome to the TTS Early Years podcast. Now, each week we're going to be joined by different educational experts from across the globe who are going to offer exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to help us as practitioners unlock all the potential for learning that there is in the early years. So to be first to hear about future episodes and to access all of the follow-up content, including ideas for your own setting, Pinterest, mood boards, and loads more, you can sign up for exclusive access using the link in our podcast description. Hello, my name is Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and I am the host for this week's TTS Talking Early Years podcast, and I'm an early years consultant, author, and trainer. So in this first series of the TTS Talking Early Years podcast, we're exploring those amazing adventures of outdoor learning in the early years. And I'm going to be talking to a number of global experts to inspire your everyday practice and unlock some of the potential for outdoor play with early years children. And I'm delighted today to introduce my guest, Sue Asquith, who is an award-winning international early childhood consultant. Good morning, Sue.
Good morning, Alistair. How are you?
I am good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Good.
Really thrilled to have you on the podcast. But for anybody that hasn't come across you or your work, could you just give us a brief introduction into who is Sue Asquith and what do you do?
Okay, absolutely. So my name's Sue, as you said. I'm an early childhood consultant working internationally and also throughout the UK. I suppose in terms of outdoor play, my kind of early experiences are as a Girl Guide, a Queen's Guide, and I was a guide leader and also a venture scout. So got kind of lots of outdoor pursuits there. So even though I didn't do any specific forest school training or nature kindergarten or anything like that, lots of kind of knowledge to bring with me and training in terms of that and inspiring the outdoors. I used to be a childminder and we had a garden here at home where we did a lot of outdoor pursuits with children, but also really lucky to live across the road from a country park where we could really explore lots and lots of different things there as well. Lots of different things happening. I'm an author of a book called Self-Regulation Schools and Young Children, and I do consultancy visits to help people prepare for Ofsted inspections and also deliver lots of training online and face-to-face, so loads of things, which obviously is really inspiring to be able to see everybody's practice as well.
Yeah, so you're just dead busy, basically. So
absolutely, yeah.
I'm really pleased you've got time to come and chat to us today. So in terms of, have you got any thoughts or any ideas around how you can get some consistency in your outdoor play right across the year?
Yeah, I think it's important to first of all think about that statutory framework requirement of that daily outside experience. And I am visiting a lot of nurseries over autumn and winter where they're saying, oh, the babies only go out if it's nice, or we try and get the babies out, but if it's raining. And it's just about thinking about that continuous provision, isn't it? Obviously, it depends on the space that you've got. Some nurseries have got a lot of outdoor spaces and lovely, lovely environments, and some of them have got a very small space. Obviously, some of them also don't have an outdoor space, so it's just trying to think about how we're going to make that outdoor experience accessible for children throughout the time as well. I think it's thinking about the seasons. Like you say, you can have all 4 seasons in one day in the UK sometimes. And it's about being obviously weather watching a little bit and a little bit informed and planning and being resilient. The outdoor space needs to be part of your continuous provision. And I know a lot of nurseries and settings do a lot of work around the continuous provision inside, but they don't necessarily give equal attention to what's going on outside. So then when you go to do an observation and they say, oh, we've got a mud kitchen, and you look and there's no mud there. And it's like, really? So what are the children going to do with this? So it's about, I think, really thinking about what's your overall intent for playing outside and how can we complement what's going on inside, not bringing the inside outside, but complement what's going on there as well. And making sure you're making those enhancements and you give it a bit of thought and somebody goes out beforehand maybe and adding those little bits of inspiration to the outdoor areas as well. So really thinking about the seasons, but I think it's about that intent, isn't it? And what that age group are interested in at the moment and what those kind of next steps or what kind of learning you want to be able to offer the children as well, and give it really careful thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think in terms of learning, it goes parallel to, so the Mother Nature and the seasons are there to support your learning and support you as a practitioner, as an adult. But what you're fundamentally doing is trying to look at what children are interested in, as you say, which might be transporting, collecting, experimenting, creating, sculpture, could be all sorts of different things, and then just use the season as a prop for that. So I think in my own practice, and also in practice I've shared with other people, sometimes we can get a little too seasonally topic-based or too seasonally themed, where you suddenly find yourself going down a very closed route around spring or around autumn, where all you end up doing in the outside is collecting autumn leaves, printing with autumn leaves, collecting conkers. And actually, they can be a great hook. But again, we need to go back to saying, what are these children interested in? And also looking across all the areas of development and thinking about how do we develop dramatic play? How do we develop an understanding of the world? How do we develop mathematics without necessarily having a tough spot outside that says, how many conkers can you count? Because it happens in the autumn. Sometimes just asking the fundamental question, would I want to do that if I was 2, 3, 4 years old? When I come outside and somebody opens the door, am I thinking, great, I'm outside. What I'd really like to do now is count some conkers. Or am I thinking, I'm outside, so I'm having almost permission to play differently? And what sort of opportunity does this space, big or small, offer me to play in that different way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's kind of taps into self-regulation and things like that, doesn't it? Because obviously it's about understanding their energy states and their feelings and behaviour and things in a moment, but also in a sociable, accessible way, which inside they can't be as crazy and as big and moving around and roary and as fast maybe outside to inside. So it's all those things as well that obviously it's offering, isn't it, throughout the seasons too.
I mean, as you're talking about, provocations and enhancements, I think even in small spaces, when you're thinking about children recognising the seasons, and again, we've talked about this with previous guests in the podcast, we do a lot of sitting inside, often as early years practitioners, talking about what's happening outside and recognising signs of spring and talking about the weather. And actually what we should be doing is just opening the door and going out. Yeah. So you can do things, even whether it's around pots or beds, so you can plant seasonally. And I know I've worked with some settings that have got a kind of seasonal rotation for planting, even in, as I say, small beds or pots, where there will be something that's linked to that season that's either growing or ripening or ready to pick or dying off. Because again, that cycle of things dying off and seeds being produced is all a useful part of children's knowledge of the seasons. Mm-hmm. Even just having a bit of thought, and I think you can get those plans online where really simple stuff that says, if you plant this now, it will grow now, and it links to this. If you plant this now, it will grow now. And it doesn't have to be planting pumpkins for autumn or sunflowers for the summer, although it can be. Mm-hmm. It can be a lot simpler and just keeps a bit of interest. And also I think when adults have got a plan, especially around something like gardening, which if you're not a gardener can be a huge mystery, if you've got a plan and you can link it to your outdoor experience, it really helps with some structure.
Absolutely. We used to plant potatoes, but we're not necessarily kind of turning over the garden here, but we used to do them in grow bags, and they were really easy to do. And actually the children could maybe feel the roots, and sometimes they could feel the potatoes actually growing. And we used to also grow one in like maybe an empty pop bottle, like a clear one that's inside wrapped around with cardboard or something in a tube, so they can see what's going on as well. Yeah. So there's loads of things you can do. You're right. It's really important that they plan that and really think about it. And I used to plan to seasons, but only very holistically, just kind of a rough guide. And it was literally just a mind map. What kind of things might we experience in spring? And if you've heard me speak before, I always say it's a plan, it's not a promise. It's just ideas. And actually, if the children come with something else and something else is interesting, we're going to follow that as well. But just all those lovely ideas you see on Pinterest or maybe Facebook or what have you, just writing them all down as possibilities so you don't forget, and then the inspiration's there for you, but not necessarily using it as a this is what we've got to do today kind of guide.
You mentioned things like mud kitchens before, and there's it's very aspirational for lots of people to have a mud kitchen, and then you get a mud kitchen. And again, lots of settings and practitioners I work with have we've got one now and not really quite sure what to do with it, because by their very nature, if you use mud in them, they are incredibly messy, because through their experience of life and experimentation, children should and will create exploratory mess. So you then got your pans and your utensils that are all muddy, your mud, your children are muddy. It's a messy space. And I think, mud kitchens can be a brilliant addition to a space. But again, it's that thinking about how could I use this mud kitchen all the way through the seasons, even to the point where it gets really cold in the winter and we're freezing ice in pans and putting various bits of things in just to see how ice responds, or creating different sorts of concoctions, all of those things need a little bit of thought. But just as you're saying, it's not saying that in this month we do this. It's about saying when the opportunity arises, we can use our mud kitchen to help us to do this. And also that acknowledgement that if you do have one, or if you grow loads of beautiful daffodils in the spring.
Sorry.
Sorry.
I could feel that coming on. I was like, oh, kind of stop it.
Typical. Do you drink?
Right.
No, we're not. That's the joy of the edit. We'll just chop that bit out.
Sorry, go on. That needs to breathe.
So it's also truth, I think, that when you're planting lots of lovely bulbs in the spring, that realistic expectation that petals will be pulled and plants will be picked, because that's all part of the learning process. And again, like you said, when you're thinking about children and where they are in terms of the developing their self-regulation and also their experience of the world, it's perfectly natural and normal for a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old to go and pick a daffodil because they're inquisitive about, the daffodil. So we as adults, if we have that expectation of outdoor play and children's play in general, won't find ourselves being gutted when we've grown these daffodils from bulb and then suddenly you go out and find that they've all disappeared and they've ended up in a pan in the mud kitchen.
Absolutely, yeah. I just remember, just a bit of a smiley kind of little add-on, a childminder who was really, really proud of her garden, and they'd done a loads of planting with their lovely spring flowers and things with the children. And then the childminder showed them how to deadhead whatever there was growing. And then obviously she was doing the ones that had died, but then the children hadn't grasped that. And then she went back out and the children thought they'd been helpful finishing the job off, and all they had to go. And yeah, it's a learning curve, isn't it? And obviously explaining to children what you're doing, because they think they're copying you. And if they haven't quite got it, then obviously...
that whole thing around self-regulation, it develops over time. It's not something that just clicks in one day. So I mean, I've seen various strategies in settings from childminders right the way through to kind of schools and nurseries where they'll say, this bed we are growing and this bed you can use for picking. And it generally works. But again, there will be some children that forget that, or, there's a different expectation. I think it's about us as adults just knowing what's likely to happen because of the usual or typical development of children, and then building that into our practice, especially in the outdoors, but everywhere, so that we're not disappointed when things don't go the way we expected them to.
Absolutely, yeah. And making sure little things, isn't it? I mean, children love to water what they're growing, but if everybody waters it too much, then obviously it's going to be waterlogged. But we used to make those tiny little watering cans just out of a pint milk carton and just put a few little holes in so they were sprinkling it, or we used to use these spray bottles so that they could maybe water it all morning doing their fine motor skills and what have you, and they're not drowned in the plants. But it's all those little ideas to kind of inspire what's going on, so that it's not, obviously you're not setting children up to fail then, but you're giving them the opportunities to be able to follow their learning through as well.
Yeah, I think also thinking about, even in a smaller space, creating opportunities for shelter, creating opportunities for things like catching the wind. So I've seen lots of lovely examples of that around simple things like paper cups all the way through to paper bags. And because it's going to be windy at some point and you want children to experience the wind, but there are loads of ideas out there, homemade kites, all sorts of things you can do, and have those resources that are available and ready to dip in. So when it comes to a really rainy day, you've got a number of things that children can use to experience the collection of rain, the moving of water, all that kind of thing, and wind and snow and all of the other things that come. And they're dead easy to put together, however you keep them. But the fact that you've got them means that as an adult, you can prompt children just to go and explore, or you can model, but it gives some purpose and some structure around bad weather days. Well, not really bad weather. They're only bad weather people that live inside. So those more challenging weather days that we often get in the UK.
Absolutely, and especially for your non-mobile babies and the children, obviously the younger children who might not be used to being outside. A lot of children obviously get transported to and from settings in cars or in a buggy, maybe with the big, I call it the big bubble, but the big rain hood over the top that goes over regardless of whether it's raining or not sometimes. So getting them used to it, and then once they are used to it and they've got some clothes that are appropriate for the weather, actually they don't mind, and they usually get used to it, and they don't care if it's raining a little bit or if it's windy. They're just having fun outside. So it's trying to get them used to that outdoor space if they haven't got one maybe at home.
Yeah, and I think it is sometimes about getting used to that because they're not used to outdoor play. You are getting used to something very new. And also, children will tell you. So if they get too hot, they'll say, I'm too hot. If they're getting cold, they'll say, I'm cold, whatever it may be. But then you also find children who will sit in puddles because they love the sensation of sitting in a puddle with their hands in, doing a little bit of splashing around. And again, for practitioners and teams, sometimes it's about a journey, about looking at that play and thinking, should I be scooping them up and saying, don't sit in the puddle, you're going to get wet, come inside, get warm? Or do we have a discussion around what might be really useful and impactful for that child about that particular play? And how can we create an environment that means that we then aren't clearing up for 3 hours afterwards and taking home loads of soggy things to dry? But you learn, I suppose, as you go along. I think a really important thing is when you're part of a team that you just keep having these regular discussions about, right, that happened, made me feel like this, actually made the children feel like that. If that's not a shared feeling, what can we do? What's our view as a team, and how can we make things easier?
Yeah, I think that shared ethos is important, especially when teams are maybe job sharing and things like that, because the children don't need somebody saying that's okay one day and then maybe get told off, or trying to get them to come away from that the next day for doing exactly the same thing as well. So I think that shared ethos is really important.
Which is an excellent point on which to end our very first episode. Can't believe that time went so quickly. So today I've been talking to Sue Asquith about outdoor play. Join us on our next episode when I'm going to be talking to Sue about more about the weather and some of those weather-related barriers and how we can overcome them. But for today, thank you, Sue.
No problem. Thank you.
I'd like to say a huge thank you to my guest Sue for joining us and providing such valuable insights into outdoor play. So you've been listening to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and with Sue Asquith. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes and be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive follow-up content, which include things like ideas for your setting and Pinterest boards that will help you shop for everything outdoors.